anybody who wants to join me. I'm going to have some online Christmas fun. And this is going to be a community event. And I'd love, Chanti, you should pop in too. Um, but I'm going to
Well, I'm writing
share,
it down.
yeah, I'm going to share some of the upcoming things. I'll share some pictures from our Christmas event that we had in Tennessee. That was amazing. And what I loved, it was filled with so much playfulness and laughter. Like it just felt to be among good, to be among people just laughing and enjoying, you know, things that we all enjoyed and that had been precious to us out of our childhoods, So it was really a good time. And then I'm also going to be sharing about upcoming workshops and seminars that I have coming up, including one in January on the Queen of Heaven. We're going to do a major breakdown on her and the churches and how all that connects and where that information comes from, what altars, what worship is given to her. And I also have some new coachings up for people who enjoy the land assignment coachings, which you can. One coming up is December 12th from 7 to 9 in the evening. And then I'll have an international one December 16th from 10 to noon. And we're going to get into some of the Netherlands, Bavaria, Auckland, New Zealand, some of those areas and do some decoding on those coat of arms. So I encourage
Wow,
people to sign up because places for those land assignments go pretty quick.
they sure do.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we look forward to that for sure. And yeah, maybe open for some prayer if you don't mind,
Yeah,
and then we
let's
can
do
get
that.
on to today's show.
All right. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for our time to gather here together. Lord, we just ask that you would bless us, that you would bless our technology, our airwaves, our equipment, and everything in our lives. And we ask that you would continue to increase our knowledge and our understanding as to the system, how it works, and the things that we may have unknowingly been introduced to or part of. So we just ask for that wisdom in all of this and thank you for this conversation. In your name we pray, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
I'm
Yeah,
excited about today's show. Sorry, go ahead.
absolutely. But maybe we should just also let the viewers know what's happening for our membership on the 5th of December at 6 p.m. Central Africa time, which is 11 a.m. Eastern time.
Right?
Right? Do we have it right? Yes.
Yes.
And we're going to be decoding more of the in-depth stuff of Harry Potter, right? Do you want to
That's
maybe just
right.
expand on that?
Yeah, so we talked about last time as we were doing the decode, how many elements of the Harry Potter movies are so similar to training in the system that the hierarchy children go through. So we're going to go through the first movie and we're going to kind of pull out those elements that are similar to training, and we're going to have an amazing conversation. There's just so much there to be brought forward. So we encourage you to join us on the membership. Again, that's Friday, December 5th at 11 a.m. Eastern. And what time you said for your time?
Yeah. 6 p.m. Central Africa time.
It will be
So 6
amazing.
in the evening. Yeah. So you almost go and watch Harry Potter.
Right?
I love, I love Harry Potter. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
That
I mean,
flying
it's
car.
good to know, it's like good to know, like what are they there's so much that the system puts out in movies right in front of our face.
Yeah.
And, we can turn a blind eye to it, but the reality is that children are really having to live many of these things and experience them. So what good does it do us to turn a blind eye, when children have to go through that? Is there a way we could utilize that information to, know how to tend and minister, or even just for awareness, to be aware of the children that are going through the system?
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
think that is so important. I think when we start looking at things with different eyes, we start seeing it differently, and our perception around it starts changing. And especially the information that we've gained over the years, knowing that as amazing as what it looks on the outside, there's such a hectic underbelly to what
Mhm.
the real agenda is. And we really
Right.
need to be aware of what that is. So see it as
Yeah.
education. For me, everything is education. It's not like I think that the danger comes in when you want to be that and you want to take on that
Right.
persona of, and diving into that portal kind of thing and really doing, yeah. But I think we're aware that all is not what it seems.
Right. Yeah. So true.
So, yeah. So, young lady, what do you have in store for us today?
Yes. Well, we're going to be talking about, um, there's so much that the system does in regards to, individuals. And this really is a big topic. We've got things that they start when, the hierarchy children, um, even at times before they're born. But, we hear very controversial topics like, IVF, um, you get adoptions, you get, um, twins or multiple children. Some of that, we've talked in the past, like about the queen, how, the system uses doppelgangers, people that, look just like others, yet you have, like, let's say the queen. We talked about how she has a twin sister that basically you have two people living the exact same life, um, but they're actually two separate individuals. You have the same thing with Prince Harry. The real Prince Harry, was not a healthy person and was hidden most of his life, while the one that we've all grown up to know as Harry, well, he's a Harry too, but he's not the real Prince Harry, right? So yet he is, like, he's lived that life. So as we look at this, not every picture that we're going to show is going to be, a child that's grown up in the system, but we're going to just kind of, as we show, a lot of the Hollywood people or famous people who have these twins that you may have been aware of that they were twinned, or you may not have. We're going to just begin to talk about, how the system uses twins. And that's a whole nother aspect, besides the doppelgangers or the IVF, um, adoptions. You get the twinning programs. So that's kind of in the background too. And in that, that's going to lead us to our next conversation later today, where you have the system, purposely trying to gain control of not only people's bodies, but of their souls, and to
Mm.
steal their soul rights. So that's a huge part of this. So go ahead to the first picture there. I'm sure we'll get back to that or I guess we can go ahead. Let's start with that. Um, so one of the things that stirred this conversation this week was article that I had received that was about the IVF. And basically, IVF is a process that couples can go through. And what they do is they basically will gather sperm and eggs, and they will inseminate the egg and the sperm to, create embryos. Then they'll implant those embryos into a womb, and you'll have some of those will take, some may not. Their hope is that at least one will take. And, this is usually for couples that really have had troubles with pregnancy. They haven't been able to get pregnant, and, they want children. So this can be, a effort that they try in that process to have a child. But, what's interesting is that, um, you know, through that process, they're going to collect a whole ton of eggs, and and they will um, they can't or you know join the egg and sperm together, which at the very moment of that joining, you have an embryo, a life that's created. It's my belief that when that at that joining, at that place, that's when the soul is also created. Now, you may get some different opinions on that. There's pastors, churches that have argued and said, no, infant doesn't necessarily have a soul. Um, they don't receive that till they're a little older. Um, you know, some of the Jewish cultures will kind of put it at the age of decision, which, they'll say, oh, a child can have a soul, but they're kind of kept in this innocent state until age 7. That's when they have to make their decision, and that's when they'll have life or not have life. Um, so you get some weird theories around when does the soul enter the body, but I believe it's there in that moment, when the embryo is formed. And so, in this process, then you have to ask, well, if they're discarding, they discard embryos that they've created that they're not going to use in the womb. And so, anyway, now they have found a way to profit off of those embryos, and they're making IVF jewelry. And people can pay money to, have their embryos in this jewelry. Um, and so let me read the article here. It says, for every baby born through IVF, several others are usually selectively aborted, indefinitely frozen, or brazenly discarded. There are some that are frozen, which we'll get into, the descendant rites in the system, and their vaults of descendants. So the article goes on, rather than those options, IVF parents can now turn their unused IVF babies into jewelry, pointing to a sick reality about the way in which our culture, and especially reproductive so-called medicine, views children as commodities. So yeah, so that gets interesting when you think about it.
That is just on another level wrong, in my opinion. But why would you want to be carrying your ovaries in a piece of jewelry? It's really just creepy. But what would be the reason that they're doing it more on a esoteric level?
I
If we're
think
looking
it's for the soul energy. Uh,
right,
that's why they have the descendant vaults, which have the eggs and the sperm in them, and they will join and create embryos and have embryos in stasis. That's part of the cryogenic freezing. Um, and so they'll create the soul, but you know, that's part of the torture. They never allow that person to really become a living being. They just tap on that person's soul energy and, you know, keep it so that that person is never fully formed.
So
They,
like a battery,
yeah, they don't
battery.
get the chance to live, and yet, you know, their spirit is in this constant state of bondage where they're pulling off their energy and the good works that God's prepared for them to do, as well as that gets into, you know, the land rights for the, you know, that child, if it had come to fruition, you know, wherever that child's foot would tread would be land that the Lord would give to that child, as well as, you know, the family. You get the family lines where, you know, they're meant to have a place to dwell. They're meant to have an inheritance and a home on the land. So really, you know, their inheritances are stolen from them in every way.
I mean, if they are using the fertilized, I mean, and they're putting that into jewelry, but surely there has to be a lifespan as well. So that, I don't even know what to call that thing because I don't, it doesn't sound like any word is right. But even if they're carrying it in the jewelry, it can't be alive anymore, surely.
That's the question. You know, that's the question. And then does that further get into necromancy? You know, the connection with the dead.
But if it hasn't even been born yet, how can it be dead? It would be a connection to the other side, maybe.
Right.
But would it still be considered necromancy?
Well, you have even though the body hasn't fully formed, you know, you've got a joining together of that egg and sperm, and it begins, you know, is in that first stage. So, um, you know, I would consider that its form and, you know, yeah,
So
I
that,
mean, it's not just tissue, it's a life,
yes,
you
I
know.
get that. But you know, it's interesting to me that how long can that be sustained? Because if that life is not nurtured or fed, or like, you know, like, I mean, as the baby grows in the womb, the mom has
Mhm.
to nurture that life so that it comes to fruition. So if
Right,
this life is not being nurtured, it's being kept in a stasis state, but they're
right.
drawing off it like a battery.
And
Um,
the
what keeps
interesting
it
thing
alive?
is the interesting thing that you say in that, right, is that when we think about the natural process, the difference is that, you know, the eggs would, or the embryos would attach to the womb, and in that attachment, there's a connection to a blood source. These infants or embryos would never have an attachment to a blood source. And scripture says the life is in the blood. So therefore, you know, they don't consider it a living being. Um, you know,
Right.
but at the same time, they've created a soul, whether they want to acknowledge that or not. And, you know, they know what they're doing. They just don't want us to believe that they're doing anything wrong or that there's any harm being caused.
Well, obviously it must work for them. Otherwise, it wouldn't be put into jewelry and it wouldn't be made into something popular. Or I wouldn't say it's popular, but I guess now, I mean, if they're making it more mainstream now, they're
Hmm.
making, you know, that available to women as well. Now that'd be interesting. That'd be interesting to see. They're
Yeah.
saying to women, okay, we'll put your fertilized eggs that you haven't used, put it. I wonder what benefit they have from that
Right,
globally. It's like a big luchard, right? It just feels like a big harvest.
right.
So
Christy's asking, could the system use it like they use diamonds? Yes, they could. They could use it like they're using diamonds. And is there a crystallization?
can you
Like when
expand
you,
on that?
yeah, like, can, you know, you have to ask, like, is there a crystallization that occurs? Like when you think about time and you think about, fossils, things that are made up of, bio uh, material, um, are they finding ways to kind of crystallize it and then they would use that like a diamond? Um, so that's possible too. It may over time crystallize. Yeah,
Gosh,
so
that's
good
so bizarre.
good to be aware of, right? So let's get further
Totally.
into this as we look at this. As we begin to look at these twins, like I just want to keep, things about the system in the background in our mind. We know after World War II, you had a very evil scientist, Joseph Mengele, that was known to do experiments on twins. And in these experiments, it included twins that he'd take from the concentration camps or other places. He would look at twinning, which would be, or we'll get into that in a minute, but he'd look at twinning, he looked at soul torture, and he looked at descendant or soul rites. Um, so this is, a famous set of twins. Many of us grew up with the Full House shows, and we're aware of Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen, and you know, they were displayed on Full House not together as twins, but played the same role of one of the characters on there. They had an intense public childhood, heavy industry exposure. They had um, identity splitting and twin branding, and went through a lot of different things, and also are big into American fashion design, and best known for their role in the Full House as Michelle Tanner. They transitioned from acting to fashion, finding their luxury brand, The Row, in 2006. So this is just one example, and in Joseph Mengele's, um, some of the things that he set up with twinning. In that process, they choose two children that are going to be trained together. They both will be hierarchy children. They can be chosen for completely different roles in the system. They may be putting one in the government side of the system, while the other one's going to be put into the sovereign military. They could, have one child that would be considered elite, and the other's going to be more of like a protector that's being trained up to um, take care of that elite individual. They may have intentions to raise these children to be married, or they may have them have more of like, you know, a knight or a wizard and a priestess, where they create a sexual bond between the children. So there can be all sorts of things that they do, and this does include, um, using twins and twinning in child pornography, we'll say. So that can be a huge thing that they use the twins in the pornography. All right, so go ahead to the next one. Another famous pair of twins are Tia and Tamara Mowry. They went from their childhood acting career to adult careers. They're known for twin identity, but allowed individuality later. So you get with the twin identity, that's kind of like the Olsen twins too, right? Where they're constantly presenting them together as twins, and they kind of come and are known as a package deal. They're presented to the world in that way, and everything in their lives revolves around their being twins, and then later they kind of get to develop their own individuality, and you'll see kind of a separating of the twin concept. So Tia and Tamara Mowry are American twin sisters known for their roles in the sitcom Sister Sister, which aired from 1994 to 1999. They have also starred in various films and television shows and are recognized for their contribution to representation in media, particularly Black or African American women. So you'll see, twins used a lot in promotion of different things. In this, you get something very similar in the system with the twinning programs, where you'll have the two that within the system, they're recognized together, like they come as that package deal, and they're known, it's like your twin or training partner is, seen with you. You're constantly doing things together, whether that's magic, whether that's obstacle courses, whether that's the games or the battles that you're involved in. Usually when they do the twinning, they'll, twin those where one's considered fire magic, the other's water magic, or they'll do the other common pairing is the earth magic and the air magic. And those are the, why they'll pair it like that is because that's where they get the strongest polarities. And then they'll have one that will be considered the male, one considered the female, and that's not necessarily speaking to sexuality or gender. It's based on, the flow of energy, one that is good at receiving, the other that is good at giving the energy. So that's what they're classifying in that equilibrium as male and female. And then, one will be considered evil and the other will be considered good. And they really have excelled in these twinning programs. And it's interesting that you'll see a lot of that taboo kind of carry over into even some cultures, especially in Africa. It was common for a lot of those cultures to, when twins were born, they would believe that one would be good and one would be evil, and they would discern which was the evil one purposely to kill him. They would remove them from the tribes and from the, get rid of the child because they honestly believed that one was evil. All right, let's go to the next one.
Yeah, I've heard that. I actually just want to ask you, though, if you don't mind, when you talk about twinning, and I understand that it's not just with identical twins or biological twins, but it's also with, as you say, maybe kids in the system that they match up, they pair up, right? So, you know, Earth and, you know, the male, the female, etc., the polarization. How do they actually do it? What do they do that twins in? What's the process used?
Well, it's bonding. Um,
Right.
and
All
you
energy.
get, yeah, like, I mean, most of us don't think about this, and you know, the Lord started showing me further concepts in this, but you have, um, you know, with twins, with sharing a womb, there's a natural bonding that
Mm,
occurs because they're aware of one another's presence. They can sense, they can touch. Even children can open, infants in the womb can open their eyes. Even though it may be dark, they can still sense that there's another presence there. And they can hear the heartbeat, which will be connected to the soul resonance. So there's a bonding that occurs with the hearing of the heartbeat, and that hearing of the heartbeat is in the same way, like when we think about a child being born, when they're in their mother's arms and they're nursing, they're close to her heart and they're hearing that heartbeat. That heartbeat releases oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone.
right.
Um, and so, you know, my belief is that the system, you know, has become very proficient in using um, a child's, you know, different hormones, different chemicals in the body. They do it with adrenal, um, you know, and with the adrenal glands where they're going to put, you know, put children into dangerous situations, stimulating those adrenals, um, and certain hormones and chemicals to get a certain response. So I think they do the same thing in the twinning programs. You know, they put these two children through horrific situations or trauma together. They they have to survive together. Like there's no way through it. You have to figure out how are we going to get through this, and you
Mm,
know that's known as trauma bonding. And in that, you know, then they do things where, you know, in some of the children in your cover lives, you can't necessarily be connected. So it depends
yeah.
on what they're trying, what's the end result. Um, some of the some of the children will be in each other's cover lives as well. So they'll be constantly together with those. They, you know, usually will do it more like a siblings, or they'll use best friend type themes. You know, your best friends, you're going to always be together. Others, you know, there's a ripping apart, which almost
Mm,
makes it, you know, the attachment more desperate. You have to know that the other one's safe. You know, sometimes they'll use the other one as leverage. You know, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, we're going to kill or take out the other one. So it can, you know, they have um, four main twinning uh, programs that they will do. Those twinning programs are going to be connected under what they consider their cherubic signs, and under what they're going to consider the houses of Israel. Each of those also then will be overlapped under a zodiac sign. So it will be in connection with the false houses and things that, you know, all of that's going to connect to certain contracts with certain entities. Um, and you know they'll play it out differently. Sometimes within that, the children will have you know a say. They'll make choices or decisions, and that will impact kind of what happens. So you know what they found is that you know they can have a framework for these programs, but at the same time, each time they do it, it's very individualistic, and it is dictated, the outcomes are dictated by the choices made. Um, so that's always been something that they cannot control. They
Yeah.
can't control, even when they force certain choices, they can't control fully the will. And that's what they're trying to, do, is find ways to control the will. So let's go ahead.
Would it also, like, in the in the system, I've heard certain stories. It's like they would traumatize the one twin, or no, not necessarily biological twin, right? But the person that they've been twin to, in front of that person, they really would do horrific things to them. Obviously, I think that would be. I would imagine that when two kids are twinned together energetically and through trauma, and the other one is receiving some serious abuse or pain, it must affect the other one watching, or who's been forced to watch,
Yeah,
very, very much more deeply, right? So it's not just the
right.
physical trauma, it almost, I would imagine, with that kind of stuff, it almost feels like it's happening to them themselves.
Yeah, and it's not just physical. You get the physical, the spiritual, the emotional trauma. They may be completely tearing down, degrading one. Like, some of these children in Hollywood, they're having to do acting, which is like a job, so they'll do things where like one is really elevated, respected, treated well, gets all of these rewards, and is the good boy. The other one is not, and they're, things are withheld from them. They, get constantly criticized. They get degraded. Nothing that they do is right. And they'll have the other one step in there because they can do it right. Um,
Mm.
so they do things like that. In fact, that was part of, my training as well, the things that I went through. Um, even though, and what that does is it creates perfectionism. You have that constant stress of having to strive to be better, but you don't receive any love. Everything is withheld from you. Like, I had things in my family where, um, those in the system, they would lavish gifts on my sister or my other siblings, but then they would never have anything for me. Like me and my youngest brother, like we'd go to the big Christmas events, and everybody, would have a name, and we're supposed to get gifts for each other. And yet, like every year, whoever had us, it would always be forgotten. Only like one year did things come through, and it was because it was a shared gift for me and my sister. Um, but they'll
Wow.
do that, leave you out, you know, um, oh, we're gonna all go do this special fun thing, but oh, you stay behind. You stay behind and visit with your proctor, whatever. So they'll do stuff like that to um, for the emotional abuse, uh, and to really degrade the one. And if you ever challenge it, it's, oh, well, why do you want that? Now you're coveting, and now you've committed a sin. And not only are you coveting, but it's your pride. You need to be humble. That's how they, so then enters the spiritual abuse for you standing up just for your decent human rights. Um, and they're masters at this, like the way that they talk to people, they're masters um, in in destruction of people, emotionally and spiritually.
Absolutely. I have no, I mean, these guys, they are masters of
Yeah,
deception. It's just wild, the amount of deception we've been living through.
right.
Wow.
So this was Dylan and Cole Sprouse. These are ones that, you know, grew up. We watched a lot of their shows, but they were Disney stars on The Sweet Life of Zach and Cody. They started acting as babies. They were raised as a twin pair, meaning, you know, they were always presented together. They had mirrored roles, you know, the same career pipeline. Dylan and Cole Sprouse are American twin actors born August 4th, 1992 in Arezzo, Italy. They're best known for their roles in the Disney Channel series The Sweet Life of Zach and Cody, and have pursued separate careers in acting and business since then. Yeah. So let's do one more and then we'll continue on in the second show with the others here. Maybe one or two more, we'll see. So we've got Benji Madden and Joel Madden from Good Charlotte. These were ones that I wasn't too familiar with, but they're considered music industry twins and have gotten into kind of the punk rock background. And they're often described as opposites in personality. Benji and Joel Madden are twin brothers and the founding members of the pop punk band Good Charlotte, which formed in 1996. They're known for their side projects, the Madden Brothers, and have both served as coaches in the reality show The Voice in Australia. So in this, you know, again, we've talked about the bonding. We've talked about, you know, why the system may do it. You know, behind it, you know, they're looking to raise people up in different forms of magic or energy. You know, but it can get interesting because, you know, as children are growing up, they don't know necessarily that, you know, they're being twinned or that, you know, the system has an eye on them and on their energy. You know, they may think that what they're experiencing is just simple games or fun things at school. They may even think that, you know, they're experiencing school bullying because they've got all these kids that are teasing or harassing them while they like the other twin, you know, a lot more. And they don't even realize that it's all, you know, the plots of the system to, you know, form and fashion them a certain way so that the system can utilize that energy, whether positive or negative. So, you know, that then starts to get into the soul torture, which we'll get into in the next show this afternoon or after this one. But go ahead to one more picture and then. So this pair too I wasn't aware of, but looks like they're quite an advantageous team. You've got Nikki and Brie Bella, WWE, the Bella Twins, which gets into the world of wrestling. So they're wrestlers and reality TV stars. Strong themes of dual identity, branding, and public image. So they've kind of kept that dual identity throughout their lives and their career. Nikki and Brie Bella are known as the Bella Twins. They're identical twin sisters who gained fame as professional wrestlers in WWE. They're former WWE Divas champions and were inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2021. Known for their twin magic and entertaining storylines during their wrestling careers. So, you know, what does fraternal twins mean? Well, you have several different types of twins actually that you can have. We'll say when a woman is pregnant. Fraternal twins is basically when you have the sperm and egg come together to form the embryo. But at that very first stages, when the embryo starts to divide like it would to, become the different parts of a person, in that initial process, rather than just straight dividing, the embryo divides, forming two separate individuals who share the same womb, and that's what fraternal twins are. Versus another way it could happen is that you're going to have in that dividing, you get two, like you could have two eggs released into the womb, both get conceptualized, and they will form two different placentas, and you have a child growing in each one. So that's the non-fraternal twins.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the other form, which I have known actually people who have had this, but you can have a woman while she's pregnant, her body can release an egg, and it could be like the farthest one I knew was there was like a 3 or 4 month difference between the twins. But so like a mom was pregnant for 4 months, then her body released an egg, she got pregnant again, and had twins. But in that you could even get twins that are born from different fathers. So there is all sorts of interesting things that can happen. So fraternal just means they came from the same egg, they were born in the same placenta. Studies have shown that fraternal twins are more bonded than the other types.
I was going to ask about that. It would seem that they would be more bonded, although, I mean, part of my question around that is that have they done experiments on that? Because I can imagine that they experiment everything. So they would then find, let's say, non-identical twins, because it's the non-identical twins, right, that are born in a separate, I would imagine that they would have done quite a few tests on proving or trying to prove the bond that the twins have.
And which is stronger, so that's where you get into Mengele's experiments. What happens when you twin, fraternal twins? What happens when you twin non-fraternal twins? What happens when, you are twinning two children that grow up in separate households? And then even getting into the, what happens when you twin from separate households two females or two males versus a male and a female from separate households? What happens when you twin different races, or different races, different genders? And then they get into what happens when you twin different ages, all sorts of different studies with that. Then they even get into, you have particularly the Hollywood, Florida base, was one of the largest in this form of twinning. But then you even get children being twinned with animals, particularly primates, and we've talked about, how they were making the animal armies. So can you twin children and animals and produce, warrior teams that way? But they've done different, not all primates, they would do different animals. Then you also get, the child hybrids. What happens when you twin hybrid children who have animal or demonic-like characteristics?
I mean, this for me is fascinating, because I honestly think that they've done so much of this trauma bonding. Would this not be the same or similar to trauma bonding?
It is. I mean, that's you get two forms of the bonding. Um, some of it's going to be formed off of the trauma, but then the opposite of that is it's going to be formed off the mind constructs. You know, you choose to be good, you choose to love, you choose, so they're going to apply to your morals and ethics. You want to be a good person, it's your duty then to love your brother. What happens if you don't love your brother? Well, then you're not being Christ-like. And if you're not Christ-like, that now impacts your eternal security. If you don't love, you're in sin, and we all know what happens to sinners. They go to hell. So therefore, your very salvation is dependent on choosing to love, even if that child is horrible to you. Even, they don't teach good boundaries. They don't teach you that's okay. It's your job. You gotta, love that person no matter what. But that's the love-hate relationship that they build. In that twinning process, there's a love-hate relationship. You need each other to survive, and yet at the same time, your best friends and your worst enemies. You trust them 100%, and at the same time, you don't trust them at all. Because, it's like...
I'm wondering about the animal armies and the kids with let's say, the primates. Would that be, so once they twinned with an animal, I would imagine that there's a very strong, or even each other, a very strong ESP between that. So you literally can hear and pick up and understand your twins' thoughts and emotions.
Right.
So they've literally, in what I can see them now having done, is taken the natural bond that two little twins in the womb have, right? And they've studied that, and they've absolutely weaponized that in the
well,
worst
and created ways, like, it's like they created ways for those animals to audibly be able to speak their thoughts through different AI techniques that got into the stents that they would put into the mind, so that those creatures could have, could be verbal, but also, there is a connection through the spirit, telecommunications that occurs. So there's all forms of different things that they did. Certainly you can hear or feel or sense the torture if that, partner you're trained to be attuned to is suffering. You're very aware of that. Interestingly enough, both in my affidavits, I don't think I put it this way in the affidavits, but I talk about, that Florida base, and both Johnny Gosh and Adam Welsh were through there, both of them a part of those twinning with animal programs.
I mean, I would love to go more into that for sure, because I can imagine, and someone was just saying, which is my thoughts exactly. So what happens when the one twin dies? Let's say they will cut the life or take the life of one of the twins. And I think often you're going to find the other one dying too. It's almost like severing a lifeline between them, right?
Yeah.
Or they go into complete depression, recline.
Well, you get the grief and the loss, like when they separate, like with my training partner, they faked his death, and all of a sudden it was like everything, all those communications were shut off, and, it really felt as though he had died, and I fully believe that, because those connections were, completely cut off and severed. That wasn't them, it's like I acknowledge that was the Lord in my situation. But at other times, you'll get people where also they may have seen or witnessed, they think someone, their loved one, is dead, and then, but that communication avenue is still open. So then they think they're hearing from the dead, or they're like, no, that person's still alive. But others will be like, no, they died, and so that's part of the trauma that they'll do. And then they'll try to twin him to someone else. What happens then when they, connect him with another individual? How will they react? How will they respond? That's what they tried to do with me, was hook me up with a different partner. And it was like, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to work with anybody else. So I didn't.
And I mean, that in itself, just thinking that your training partner was dead in such a tragic and traumatic way, of course, traumatized you even more, right?
Right. So, and then imagine 34 years later, you find out he wasn't dead. And you're like, wait, what? None of them are dead?
Right.
I mean, I witnessed it with my own eyes. It's like, how could, you're like, it's just surreal, the way they do things.
What did they, I mean, like, in a situation like that, because we're seeing so much of that actually on different levels as well, like movie stars dying or whatever, and then they kind of recycle back somehow.
Yeah.
So it's like,
well, like you talked about Mandela, like how there were reports he had died, and then all of a sudden, next thing he's back, and people are like, wait, what? We thought he died.
They quickly took that back, so hence the Mandela effect was created, right?
Right.
How crazy is that? Yeah, wow. Anyway, so yes, we shall continue this conversation in part 2 in an hour's time. So
see you all then.
Yeah, thank you guys for joining us for part 1, and really fascinating conversation. And let's carry on having this conversation in part 2, because I think there's a lot to be learned here. So appreciate that.